Hey guys, it is Jenna, what is up, and welcome back to another Board Game 101 video. I just have been loving these videos and I've been planning each and every one, and this one is the second one in the series. So if you haven't gone and seen the first one was kind of just like an introduction to modern board gaming, but this one, like I mentioned in that video, we are going to be discussing board game mechanisms or mechanics. I think both of them are correct, so whatever one you prefer to say, you can say that. But some of you are probably wondering, what the heck are board game mechanisms and mechanics, and why are they so often chatted about when talking about board games, and what does it mean when the board game is this type of mechanism versus this type of mechanism, and if they have multiple and all of those things. So we're going to be chatting about all of those today. I am going to be going into 10 different ones. I am fully aware that there are a lot more than 10 mechanisms. I will actually link below a document that Board Game Geek has on their website where it's just a huge list of every single type of mechanism, and then it actually shows you some games in that category and kind of explains to you what it is. But I will be talking about 10 of them today. But before we get into those 10 mechanics, I do want to chat about one that most of you are probably aware of, and it is the roll and move mechanism, which I guess I haven't explained what mechanisms are in general. It's basically how you play the game. What you are doing throughout the board game is what the mechanism is. So the first one is roll and move, which is the most widely known, and honestly it's like what a lot of like the first board games and a lot of the board games back in like the 90s were, which is you roll a die, whatever the die says, you move that many spots on the board and you do the action that is on the spot that you landed, which is a very straightforward mechanism, but that's the easiest way to explain all of the rest of them. It's just basically what you are doing during the game to, you know, progress through the game and then at the end win or lose the game. So without further ado, I am going to get into all of these mechanisms. I'm going to be chatting about 10 of them. These are the most widely used in my opinion nowadays. There are a few that I don't prefer and there's a few that I absolutely love, so we will be chatting about all 10 of those. If you guys are interested in continuing to watch and kind of getting a good grasp on, I would say, the most popular top 10 mechanisms are, then just keep on watching. If you enjoy, give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe if you have yet to do so. I will be doing a lot more board game content throughout the years, so get excited for that. I do quickly want to mention as well that not all board games just have one mechanism. There are a lot, actually most of them nowadays do combine like 2 or 3 different mechanisms in one, and it doesn't really make it any more complicated. It's just like different aspects of the game that you are doing that certain mechanism. So yes, I just quickly wanted to mention that. So the first out of these 10 mechanisms that I wanted to chat about is the action point mechanism, and basically throughout the game each player on their turn will have a certain amount of actions to do, and you will have a little board or something of the different actions that you can choose from. So for example, there might be a game that has move as an action, pick up an item as an action, get a coin as an action, and start combat or something like that. And on your turn, you are allowed to do 2 of those actions. So on my turn, I might think, let me do a move and then combat action. So that'll be my 2 things that I'm doing on my turn, and then it'll go to the next person. They will choose their 2 actions, and so on and so forth. So a great example of this mechanism is Pandemic, which Francis and I have only ever played the original, which is amazing, but we probably should dive into more of the Pandemic games. But the original one is a great example of this, where you have 4 actions on your turn. So there's move, there's pick up cubes, there's travel to a different location, different things like that. But for example, on my turn, I might choose to move once, twice, and then pick up 2 cubes. So that would be move twice, pick up 2 cubes. That would be my 4 actions on my turn, and then it would go to the next person. There are a few other things that happen during your turn, but for the action point mechanism, you have those 4 moves and then it moves on to the next person. So that's a great example, as well as Takanoko, which I love that game with the cute little panda. As well as, what other ones do I have? Horrified is a good one. And Subterra. Those 2, you have a character that each character has a different amount of actions, but everyone has the same list. So some characters might be able to do more actions on their turn than other characters, and things like that. So the next mechanism is definitely not one of my favorites. I would say that this is probably my least favorite out of this entire list of 10, and that is area control. I'm just not a fan of like combat between people. I really do love a good competitive game, but I like competition in other ways rather than like head-to-head competition between one another in like combat, if that makes sense. But we definitely don't have too many of these games, so it's kind of hard for me to, you know, give examples and stuff because we really only have like 2 or 3 games in this mechanism or with this mechanism. So area control, I'm sure you guys have seen it before. A well-known one is Risk, where usually the board has a map and you're trying to take over as many places on the map as possible by doing combat with different people. Usually it's the person that has the majority of like people in that combat. So if it's like a person that has 2 against a person that has 3, the person with the 3 wins the combat and they take over that person's area on the map. It's really self-explanatory, but I am just not a huge fan of area control. I will say that there is one, I don't know if this is technically considered area control, but Scythe is one where I'm okay with it. You can be like in combat with people, but you can also choose not to and kind of just stay away from people, which I do prefer that type where you're not forced to do combat with other people. You can choose not to. So Scythe is one that I'm okay with, but other examples are Small World. The cool thing about Small World is that you have different factions, which is super fun. You might end up with like spirit wizards or flying wizards. You have like 2 tiles that you put together to make your like unique faction. There's like, I don't even know, wealthy giants. It's super fun, but basically you are going against another player and trying to take over as many spots on the map, and you get points for doing that. It's again pretty self-explanatory, not one of my favorites, but Carcassonne is another one that's a little bit area control that we have, but it's not like super area control. A lot of the area control games that I know are very like war based, and I'm just not a huge fan of those types of board games, but they are very popular. So area control is another one of the 10. Again, not my favorite, but I still wanted to mention it in the video. Next one is one of my personal favorites, and it is deduction games. These ones are so fun and so like thinky and puzzly, but basically it is a game where you are trying to figure out different clues to deduct different things. You usually have like a sheet in front of you where you can X off things and kind of deduct different things from the clues that you're getting to eventually come up with a solution. And you're generally trying to like come up with a solution first so that you are the winner. But a few examples of this are Awkward Guests, which I absolutely love. You're getting clues on cards and you're Xing things out and you're trying to figure out who murdered Mr. Walton, I believe is his name, but there's a bunch of different suspects and places in the house and different weapons, and you're trying to figure out who killed, why they killed, and what they killed with, and it is just so much fun. Think like Clue, but like 1,000 times better. It's just a good time. But there's Awkward Guests, there's also Alchemist, which is a super fun one where you're trying to combine different ingredients. That one has an app, and Search for Planet X is another deduction game that I absolutely love. I think it was number like 2 on my top 10 list that I did at the end of last year. I think it was at the end of last year. But yeah, that one is so much fun. Absolutely love it. I love the theme of like trying to figure out where Planet X is and deducting different things, because each like pie slice on the like space map has different things in it and you're trying to... Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent, but deduction games are super fun. There's also social deduction games, which I don't think we really have. Deception Murder in Hong Kong might be a social deduction game, but those are more social. You're talking around the table with everybody and trying to think the word is deduce. It might be deduct. I'm not sure. I might be saying it totally wrong. But you're trying to deduce like who did it or those type of thing. I will link again the Board Game Geek little section down below where you can actually go and see the technical explanation for social deduction. But yeah, that is one that we have, that's social deduction, but we don't have a ton of those. But they are super fun if you're into more social games and like chatting around the table and stuff like that. But anyways, yes, that is deduction. I absolutely love it. If you're a huge fan of like Sudoku and things like that, I would definitely recommend. That's like one of my favorite things. So it is just so much fun and so puzzly in your head and so thinky. But yes, that is deduction games. Next mechanism is another one of my favorites, and it is drafting. There's a bunch of different types of drafting. There's card drafting, there's dice drafting, tile drafting. The basic thing is that you're taking one for yourself and then someone else is taking one, and so on and so forth. So the general like action of drafting is what I'm talking about. And again, like I said, you can do it with cards, which a great example of that is Seven Wonders, where you're starting with a hand of cards and you're picking one for yourself and then you're giving the rest of those cards to the person beside you. You're either doing it this way or this way, but that is drafting cards. There's Sushi Go Party, which I absolutely love. And then there's also the act of drafting dice, which Sagrada is an amazing example of this. I love Sagrada so much. Fun little fact as well is the designer of Sagrada is actually from the town that Francis and I live in, which is super cool, and I love that. But Sagrada is a great one where you have a pile of dice in the middle and you're drafting it from there. So you take one for yourself, the next person takes theirs, the next person takes theirs. I believe there's a way where like if you're the first person to take a die, you're gonna be the last person to take a die because you are getting like first choice, so then to make it fair, you get the last choice, which I really love. But you're taking die from a pool in the center, basically. And there's also tile drafting as well, which Calico's a good one for that. I've never played Patchwork, which I do want to play Patchwork, but that's a good tile drafting game as well. Miyabi as well is a good one. I love Miyabi. But it's basically when you have like a bunch of things in the center and you're picking one, the next person's picking one. Card drafting is a little bit different because you're taking one and passing it on. There are a few dice drafting games like that, like Sushi Roll, where you take a die and then you like give it to the next person. Taverns of Tiefenthal is like that as well, where you have a little platter that you have your dice on that you've rolled. You take one and then you give the rest of them to the next person. Whether you're taking one and giving it to the next person or drafting from a pool, it's generally drafting, and it is one of my favorite things ever. I gave you guys a ton of examples. I will say there are a ton more. I feel like drafting is a pretty widely used mechanism and I absolutely love it. So that is, I believe, number 4. Drafting. Next up, we have deck building or bag building. Bag building is definitely not as common as deck building. Deck building is like a super common one to see in board games, especially these days. I feel like deck building is like one of a few different mechanisms in a lot of different board games. But the basic act of deck building is that all the players start with a general hand of cards or a general deck of cards. Those are your starter cards, and then throughout the game, you're using those cards to do actions and purchasing more cards to add to your deck. That is the act of deck building. So you're building your deck up to have more cards that are going to help you more throughout the game. As you're using your cards, you're putting them into a discard pile. Once you have no more cards in front of you for your deck, you just take your discard pile, you shuffle those up, and you start again. So it's kind of a circular thing where it's just going through the same deck over and over again. You're adding more cards to that deck, so the deck is getting larger, and so on and so forth until you get to the end. Typically with like deck builders, you have like a victory point on each card. Some of the cards don't have victory points. Usually your starter cards don't have victory points, but the cards that you are purchasing will have victory points, and at the end you're going to go through your deck that you built and you're going to add up all of those victory points, and whoever has the most wins, obviously. But sometimes deck building is just a small part of a bigger game, so that is something to keep in mind. But some of the games that Francis and I have played that have deck building are Clank, that's a good one. We've played Dominion, which I think Dominion is technically like the first deck building game. It was pretty good. We played it at a board game cafe, but we haven't purchased it because typically Francis and I do like deck building, but we like other aspects to it as well. You're not just building a deck and playing cards, you're doing other things. So that one, you're just building a deck and that's pretty much it. But what did I say? Lost Ruins of Arnak is another one. Clank, I've already said. Dominion. Concordia is a good one. So those are all deck building. And then there's like Quacks of Quedlinburg, which is my best example of one that we've played. That is a bag building, which you're not purchasing cards to put into a deck of cards. You're purchasing little like tiles or ingredients that you put into your bag, so you're building your bag. Quacks of Quedlinburg is such a fun game. I definitely recommend it. You're putting different ingredients into your pot. It's definitely like a push your luck type of game, which push your luck is another mechanism that I'm not going to get too into because it's pretty self-explanatory. You're pushing your luck. But that's another mechanism on top of these 10 that I'm going to be talking about. But Quacks of Quedlinburg is a good one. Definitely the best bag building example that we have. So the next one, I don't actually technically know if this is a mechanism, but it's quite widely used, and it is engine building, which basically it is you creating an engine that scores you points more and more as you go throughout the game. So your engine starts pretty small at the beginning, but as you go through the game, you get things that then allow you to get more things, if that makes sense. Typically, the way that the engine starts building up can be a combination of a bunch of different mechanisms, but the most simple engine building game that I will mention is Splendor. Splendor is a great just starter engine building game where you are getting cards from the center. You buy them with these like gems that you collect. On your turn, you can take 3 gems, I believe, or 2 of the same gem. So you're taking these gems and then you're purchasing a card with those gems, and each card is a gem themselves. You eventually accumulate a bunch of those cards that then get you more cards because these are like permanent gems that you have in front of you. It's a little bit difficult to explain, but as you go throughout the game, you have more gems in front of you, therefore you're able to purchase more expensive cards that require more gems. That is the most simple way for me to put it, but Splendor is a great starter engine builder, so if you do want to look into engine building games, it's super satisfying because as you go throughout the game, you are creating this engine and you're just getting so many things. Everdell is another great one because you're placing a bunch of cards in front of you, and whatever cards you're placing in front of you, some of them do get you more things. So for example, there's a card that's like, when you play a unique critter, get this, so you will get that. So it just gets super rewarding when you get to later in the game and you have so many things happening and your engine is in full force and you're getting so many points. It's just really good. So engine building is another one that I wanted to mention. Again, I don't technically think this is actually a mechanism because it's not something you're doing throughout the game. I guess it is. Let me know if you guys think that engine building is a mechanism or not down below, but yes, those are 2 that I know of, Splendor and Everdell, but let me know again what other ones you guys think are engine builders. But yeah, that is that one. Next one is again one of my favorites, and it is pattern building. I absolutely love it. It's basically when you're placing things into your board and trying to create different patterns and different setups in order to get as many points as you possibly can. This is so much fun. I just love puzzly games. I love placing things in certain places to try to get points here, but then connect it to this to get points there. I just absolutely love this type of game. It's like my favorite thing ever. So a good example of this is Calico. We just recently got Calico, but I absolutely love it. Oh my goodness, it's just so much fun. Francis is not a fan because he gets frustrated when he can't do everything. So it's definitely one where you have to try to only focus on some things, maybe forget about a few other things. You might be able to get all of them done, but it's pretty rare that you will get all of them done. So Yeah, Francis always tries to do the most and it kind of screws him over in the end, but Calico's a fun one where you are creating a patterned quilt for cats to come and lay on. It's so stinking cute. You're trying to get certain patterns all in a row. You're trying to get a bunch of the same color in one area to get buttons onto your quilt. You're trying to please the cats by having their certain thing that they want so that you can put a cat there. It is just so fun. So Calico's a good example of that, as well as all of the Azul games, which we only have the third Azul, which is Summer Pavilion, but I think eventually I want to try to get all 4 of them. The original one is apparently amazing. The stained glass one, I've heard mixed feelings on, and then they came out with a new one, which are like hexagon tiles. I think it's called Queen's Garden, but I would love to just have all 4 of the Azul games in my collection. I think it would be amazing. Francis, unfortunately, is not as much of a fan of the puzzly pattern building games, but it's okay. I can always, I think, play them solo. I'm not 100% sure, but maybe I can find some friends that like puzzly pattern building games like me. So the last 3, I'm not gonna say it over and over again, but these last 3 are some of my favorites. The first one is Roll or Flip and Write. This one, you always have your own board that is either a piece of paper that you throw out after, or some of them are now coming out with ones where you can erase it after, a dry erase board. But it basically is a sheet. You have your own sheet and you're either rolling die and then writing things down on your own sheet in different ways, or you're flipping cards and writing things down. A great example of this is Welcome to Your Perfect Home. This is one of my top games. I absolutely love this game. It was definitely one that we got pretty early on in the board gaming hobby. It's pretty complicated and there's a bunch of different things that you can score, but the general act is that you have 3 piles of 2 cards. You can pick 2, 2, or 2, and then you put that number. So for example, say that there was a 5 and a park symbol, so that's the little trees. I would put a 5 in one of the houses. Basically in Welcome to, you're trying to number houses in 3 different streets in ascending order. You have to do them in ascending order. So if I put a 5, I can't put anything higher than a 5 below it. I can only do, 5 and down, and then up from there I can only do 5 and up. So you're putting them in different spots in the houses, and then the icon is different ways that you can score. So you're just continuing to do that. Everyone has their own sheet. The only thing that a lot of people complain about with Roll or Flip and Writes is that there's not a lot of talk during the game. Everyone's kind of focusing on their own paper. So if you do really enjoy the social aspect of board gaming, we generally do talk throughout the game, but you're not chatting about the game. You're not going against each other really. I guess you are in the end going to be adding up your points and comparing it to each other, but you're basically just not talking about what you're doing on your boards a ton. You're kind of just keeping to yourself, picking what number you want, picking what icon you want, and then moving on to the next one. So you just flip or you roll again and then you write more on your sheet. That continues until everyone is finished, and then you add up your scores and whoever has the highest score wins. So that is a good one. Welcome to is my favorite. There's also Can I talk? Cartographers is a really good one. They just recently came out with a new one called Cartographers Heroes, which we kind of want to try. That's So Clever is one that we don't personally have, but it is more of a roll and write. Railroad Inc. is another one I've heard is good, but our top 2 are definitely Welcome to Your Perfect Home and Cartographers. So that is Roll and Write or Flip and Write. Next one is tile placing or tile placement. This one can be pretty similar to the one that I mentioned before, which is pattern building, but there's some tile placing games that you don't have to do any pattern. It is basically just the act of taking a tile and placing it somewhere. Some tile placement games, you are actually building the board as you go with tiles. A great example of that is Carcassonne, where you're flipping and building paths with the tiles. Subterra is another good one where you are in like a cave and you're exploring the cave. So as you explore a new part of the cave, you're flipping a tile to then move on to that. So that is a type of tile placement game, but there's also ones where you're grabbing a tile and placing it. Barren Park is a great example of this. You are taking a tile and placing it on your board, and then whatever icons you cover up, you then get to pick up more tiles. So it's a very, very big tile placement game. There's a little bit of Tetris involved, which I love, so that is a great one. Calico is technically a tile placing game as well as a pattern building game. So you guys can see there that there's two mechanisms coming in to one game, kind of like I mentioned before. But yes, tile placing is again another one of my favorites. I just love the act of like trying to fit different tiles into different places and all of those things. And the last mechanism that I'm going to talk about today is probably one of the most used and most popular, and that is worker placement. Worker placement is probably both Francis and I's favorite mechanism. I personally love pattern building, Francis doesn't, but we do connect with the love of worker placement. So worker placement is pretty self-explanatory. You start with some workers and then you place your workers onto the board. There are a bunch of different places on the board that you can place your worker to then do an action. Sometimes there are worker placement games where there's only a certain amount of spots on that certain action that you can put. So if the people that you're against, if all of them go there, they're going to take up all the places, so then you can't go there, so you have to pick something else. So that's kind of the downfall of worker placement, and why you kind of tend to want to go first is because you want to get to that action before someone else does, and you only have a certain amount of workers. So if you're wanting to do that action really bad, you do want to try to get there first. Some great examples of worker placement are games like Viticulture, which is one of my favorites. It's actually the one that I used for the example. There's also Everdell, which is a great example. Lost Ruins of Arnak has some worker placement. They only have 2 workers in that game, which makes me so mad. You really want to try to do more, but you only have your 2 workers. But the nice thing about Lost Ruins of Arnak is they compile a bunch of different mechanisms, so the worker placement is not like the only thing that can get you to places. There's also like exploration, there's the deck building aspect of Lost Ruins of Arnak, so that's a great example of a really good game that puts together a bunch of different mechanisms, and in the end, it's a really great game. So yes, anyways, that is the last of all 10 of the mechanisms. That is the video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give this video a thumbs up. Also, let me know down below if you're just getting into the board game hobby, which one of these sounded the most exciting to you. If you're already in the hobby, let me know which one is your favorite. I will say that I think the like puzzly, like pattern building games are my favorite, as well as deduction and worker placement and flip and write or roll and write. We don't really have a lot of roll and write games, so please let me know down in the comments. I'm asking you guys to let me know a lot of things down in the comments, so hopefully we can all chat about board games down there, but let me know if you guys know of any good roll and write games and also deduction games. Those are the 2 that I love, but we don't have a ton of those games in our collection, so let me know. But yes, that is everything, like I said, for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you're not subscribed already, definitely consider doing so. I will be doing a lot more of these videos in the future. I might actually, once our collection gets bigger, I might go into more recommendations and more in-depth like talks about a bunch of different games in certain categories. So I might do my recommendations for worker placement games, my recommendation for roll and write games, just different videos solely on one mechanism. Let me know if you guys want to see that. But I feel like we do need to play some more games, get our collection larger before I can really talk about a lot of them in one video. But yes, I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for taking your time to watch this. Hopefully you enjoyed. Remember, you are somebody's reason to smile. You are somebody's reason to smile. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, friends.